Hey, and we're live here. Hello, I'm Mark Sample, and I'm pleased that Talan Memmott is able to join us this evening or this morning or this night, wherever you are, to talk a little bit about Lexia to Perplexia. So I think as soon as Talan starts talking, I'll disappear and he'll appear on the screen.
Okay, I'm glad to be here, talk about this work. It's been around quite a while, almost 16 years now, so it's lived a long life for a digital object, so to speak. So you want me to just go on?
Yeah, well, I mean, so this week in the class and also with my students on campus, we've been talking about how do you actually preserve these works, because everything goes out of date eventually.
Right. Well, I mean, like I said, the work is almost 16 years old, and I mean, it's interesting to me that it still gets talked about. My thinking when I first created the work was like, it'll last. People will be interested in it maybe 2-3 years. At the time, I mean, this is 1999, 2000. There was a lot of talk about digital artifacts or going digital and then it'll live forever. I never quite believed that to begin with, so in creating the work, I mean, I was already thinking about one other story about what was going on then is there were these browser wars going on between Netscape, this is ages ago, and Internet Explorer, and DHTML, which became XHTML and HTML4 and 5, was just really starting to get used, but the way they linked the JavaScript with the browsers was completely proprietary for both of them. There wasn't any common base. There wasn't any jQuery, so to speak, at this point in time. So to code things in DHTML for Netscape, what you had to set up things one way, for IE a completely different way. So in developing this, I became really aware, like thinking about like this is not going to last. These ideas of proprietary code to make things function on one platform or another, and that became part of the critique within the work. I've probably spent more time writing code to sniff browsers than writing the code to make the work function. So the work is about network identity, and and it really kind of is. I mean, I would call it network phenomenology is really what the work is about. So thinking about how we really are attached to terminals, and I'm thinking about this back in the 1999, 2000. There weren't smartphones. There weren't iPads. Laptops were super expensive, so the primary orientation toward the screen was a big CRT and a tower. So thinking about that point of attachment to the network, and certainly that's changed over the years. So and this is one reason that I've thought about preservation being problematic for this particular work. The other things are the expectations in browsers have changed, network speeds have changed. Broadband was not, it was super expensive and not available everywhere in 2000. To really do, I would have to do like a Lexia to Perplexia 2.0 that would be a completely different work to deal with the philosophical aspects of the work, because the platforms have changed so much. And I mean, this is something like thinking about within the work, it's discussed. There's parts within the work. Well, there's one part within the manifestos section of the piece where, I mean, it's claiming that it's already obsolete. You know, and if you click on, you know, so kill me, why don't you, or something like that. I can't remember the exact verbiage of the link. It shuts down the browser. You know, so, and claiming that, you know, it's not fast enough, it's that it's kludged together, etc.
Mm-hmm.
You know, these are certainly still problems within digital development, uh, and in terms of you know, how, you know, things that, I mean, we still have two primary platforms. We have the Apple platform. I mean, I'm thinking in broad strokes here. You know, the Apple platforms, and we have the Android platforms.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in terms of mobile devices. So, and they're both proprietary. So we're kind of in the same position again. You know, where things are developed separately, um, but the orientation toward the screen has changed. Um, you know, so thinking about this, the critique within Lexia or Perplexia was timely then, but is rather untimely now. You know, so for it to remain timely, it has to kind of remain what it is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so to update it, it doesn't carry the philosophical weight that it did at the time. So it seems at the, you know, 15 years out, it would seem, parts of it would seem rather naive to current platform and screen orientations. You know, I mean, that's not, I still open the work every now and then and look at it, and I think it's amusing, and but, you know, and I have published it as just a straight text. But, you know, I mean, it has to be annotated in some way that excuse me, that allows the reader to know that this is about a specific time in technology, in the history of technology. You know, so let's see. I'm looking at my notes here. You know, do you have any questions or?
Well, I'm thinking of the divide you talked about iOS and Android, and in one of my classes right now, we're looking at Pry, which of course is an iOS app, and it's you know, I don't know how developers and designers and writers and artists kind of what their options are to deal with this. Do they try to reach everyone, or just say, okay, there are some people who won't be able to read this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the way it has to be. I mean, that you have to, you know, as soon as you select a platform, I mean, as soon as you select a platform, you have to realize that if you're going to make it available to everyone, you're not just doubling your work, you're probably quadrupling it, because it's not just a matter of just porting it over anymore. You know, I mean, like thinking about JavaScript, in the case of Lexia or Perplexia, you know, and there's tons of JavaScript within that. You know, making this work in both common browsers at that point was not nearly as difficult as it would be to take something like Pry and move it over to an Android tablet. You know, the protocols are really substantially different. You know, where, I mean, with JavaScript, it was, although it was challenging, it was still a fairly doable exercise. You know, I mean, unless you, I mean, thinking, I mean, this is one thing to think about, is that, you know, game developers and game companies can do this because they have an army of people working on it. When you're talking about an individual author or artist, that's what they're an individual or a small team, you know, and it takes resources, you know, huge amounts of resources to be able to do this. You know, so, I mean, I think at some level, it's not a matter of giving up, that, you know, okay, well, I just can't do that. It's just that you have to be selective, you know, and artists and writers, they want to move on to another project, you know, so spending another year developing it for another platform, you know, it seems, it would seem tedious. I mean, you know, if the work's making money, maybe you can hire someone to do that, but, you know, it's fairly rare, you know.
I like that point. about the individual artists working, or just a small collective of artists versus the huge AAA blockbuster video game industry. When we
Mhm.
were talking earlier, you mentioned something about how, the work itself has stayed the same, but everything else around it has changed.
Yeah, that's very true. This uh, I've thought about this quite a bit and been to many conferences where preservation becomes an issue, and then where the idea of best practice during production becomes an issue. Like artists should do this, and then their work will last longer. Well, that's not the way art works. Artists don't deal with best practices, and in regard to technology, usually they're working. I'm thinking about flash work that have done, that is running counter to what the intended purpose is. So, and same thing with, JavaScript is not developed, or like say the show hide aspect of what was called DHTML at that point. Um, that was not developed to make an eyeball open and close in a work, in a creative work. There's other interests involved in having that sort of functionality. So if preservation is approached from a practice point of view, then you are limiting the artist. So if there's one thing I'm against in terms of preservation, it is the idea of projecting an idea of best practice toward artists. There's technique, yeah. There's good code, and good code is code that runs. And then there's bad code and it doesn't work. So that's best practice. But allowing a variety of avenues is essential to keeping electronic literature, digital art vibrant. Um, but thinking about Lexia Perplexia as a digital object, yeah, the object remains the same. A digital object doesn't erode like it doesn't erode like a painting or something. It's not a matter of conservation where it needs to be kept up. So thinking about rewriting the code within Lexia Perplexia, that seems like an act of conservation or adaptation rather than preservation. So because the artifact itself has not changed one bit. It's pristine as it ever was. If it was ever pristine. But the world around it's changed. The platforms have changed. So that's something to address, but it shouldn't be addressed at the level of altering the work. Preservation should occur at the level of preserving the platforms. Which certainly, at some level, it doesn't allow for like work to be widely viewed as it may have originally have been. Because the idea of preserving platforms is an expensive enterprise. And a little bit of gleaning is involved in that. Finding somebody's old PC with Windows 95 running Netscape 4. Who has a machine like that? I have one in a box somewhere, but I haven't started it up. For years.
Right.
Um,
That, this makes me wonder about. I mean, I love the distinction between preservation and conservation. That's, I think, an important distinction that gets glossed over. How would you feel about, so not pulling the Windows 95 desktop tower out and loading that up, but if, let's say, there was a Windows 95 emulator that could run in your browser, that could then run this JavaScript from 1999, would that be worthwhile? Or
in some cases, yeah, absolutely. The idea of emulation is a form of preservation for sure. In the case of Lexia Perplexia, having a cathode tube in front of your face and a tower where you're completely embodied in the experience that's being discussed is a key thing. I'm not anti-preservation in any way, but but part of, for the, like I said, for the theoretical or philosophical aspects of Lexia to Perplexia to be understood, it really needs to happen in a specific environment, where you need a CRT and a tower. So it's because that's the content, that's the critique within the work. But I mean, emulation is interesting. I would, emulation is probably better than adaptation or conservation of code,
Hmm.
because it's less invasive. Um, and I mean, certain things could be simulated. I mean, simulated, like the environment that I just talked about in terms of a CRT and the tower. Some of that could be simulated, so it feels like that.
Hmm.
And then the platform is emulated.
Right. That's cool. I have a question to ask you that's not about Lexia to Perplexia, but I want to make sure that you've kind of gone through some of the highlights that you wanted to talk about.
Well, I mean, a couple things. Like, I mean, before we started, I've mentioned this about, like, one thing about Lexia to Perplexia, and this is a problem with emulation, I would say, with this work, is like a lot of the animations within the work are set up using timers within JavaScript. Okay, timers are based on processor speed, you know, so the animations within Lexia to Perplexia run much faster in 2015 than they did in 2000. So at that level, the platform becomes key to the timing of the work and things like that. So I mean, that's an issue that has come up when I mean, like Lexia to Perplexia was shown at the Library of Congress, and the machine it was emulating and was running much faster, and things just flew by. Okay, well, what was that? So that becomes an issue. Um, so, well, I went over the platform stuff, but at another level, thinking about this, that since I'm talked about writing code as part of my writing practice, and thinking about it, it's integral to the overall work. Another level, the coding language then, although it seems antiquated at this point, I mean, this could be, Lexia to Perplexia could be executed in probably a few days using jQuery, the code itself, I mean, just moving it over or changing a few lines, and yeah, all the show hide stuff will work and everything. But like I said, that's an adaptation akin to, would you take, or when if someone was to adapt a Shakespeare play into modern English, it's the same kind of translation thing going, or adaptation going on. So at that level, if because I'm thinking of coding as part of the writing practice, that its changes over time are a reflection of the way natural language changes, and in a much more truncated way, because code is constantly being optimized, changed. Protocols are changed often. So at that level, that's a more kind of something that eventually then it probably wouldn't work, or it becomes some form of linear B or something at some point where no one can understand it, which would be, that's kind of the natural process of, that's the kind of erosion. The erosion is cultural, not with the digital artifact.
Right. That's another really important point there. I was thinking about how you said you were kind of using JavaScript kind of against the grain. It wasn't meant to be used to open and close eyeballs. Later, you used Flash in ways that it really wasn't designed for. Uh, are there other kind of tools that you've used counter to their intended official commercial purposes?
Well, I mean, right now, like, I mean, I'm teaching an interactive narrative course right now, and within the class, I mean, we've dealt with branching narratives, we dealt with text generators, etc. But I mean, thinking about Twine, I mean, Twine is not really necessarily intended to be a text generator, but that's what I've been experimenting with that for a bit, like really the last year. And that's what I have my students doing. And they've never thought about using this tool that way. They think of it as more as a interactive fiction engine. You know, so I mean, that's one example. I mean, there's other things like which is really kind of base level, but doing signal processing with digital video. You know, I mean, digital videos using HD video is supposed to be, you know, it's super clean. It looks great. It looks a little flat, but it looks great. But you know, and I just decided to do this. This is a number of years ago, but just break the signal as the video is being imported, like not just importing the files, like having the files stream onto the machine, but putting, you know, having cutting a firewire cable and I didn't even know you could do this, but putting a resistor in there, or like just messing with the signal.
Right, that's really awesome.
Or you know, yeah, an attenuator in the middle of that, and see what happens. You know, and what's interesting is it affects the video signal, it affects the audio, it affects everything. And what you're talking about having happen there is that the digital becomes analog and then becomes digital again.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and yeah, you know, probably 70% of the time, the file that you end up with is totally corrupted, but that 30% is really interesting.
Mm-hmm. That's really cool. Earlier in this class, we had talked about glitches and dysfunctionality. What do you see as like the cultural draw towards glitches and the kind of the broken down code and artifacts and that kind of thing?
Well, that's another thing I've been doing for the last number of years is really hex edits on video, or on video and on still images.
Mm-hmm.
I think one thing with hex editing that I really enjoy is the unpredictability of what happens when you start replacing characters. You know, it's yeah, I mean, it's really there's something almost magical about it. I think that in terms of process, that's interesting to me. I think also that, I mean, you know, and I mean, we can get into this at a number of different levels, but, you know, the aesthetics of glitch are actually, you know, beautiful. I mean, the, you know, glitch JPEGs, you know, hex edited JPEGs end up quite amazing. I mean, I did this run of, I just took a black JPEG and started hex editing them, and ended up with amazing images, you know, that you know, they were just they end up with amazing color. You know, I mean, you're replacing characters at a deep level within the file, and it just is amazing. But the other thing that I was going to say is that with digital television, we encounter glitch all the time. You know, when the signal is malfunctioning, you know, like the top of the image will be all dithered and stuff. You know, so I think at some level it's also become somewhat naturalized that we just see it. You know, I mean, I'm speaking specifically about glitched images at this point. You know, I mean, the other things about like breaking down code, or code that causes glitches. You know, there's a balance between the unpredictability and the intentional that produces something that is close to the uncanny. That I think is again, it's about process, but you know that it's computers glitch all the time. I mean, I think it's naturalized. We understand the language of glitch because we experience it. You know, so it's almost like representational painting is now glitch.
Right.
Or it is our representational painting, or
It's our language.
Yeah,
our visual language. Right. Well, I don't, you've been really gracious, and it's perhaps dinner time or something for you, so I don't want to take up any more of your time, but it's really fantastic to have you drop in to talk about your works and about Lexia to Perplexia, and also the bigger kind of meta issues about preservation and conservation and emulation. Those are all really kind of crucial topics that I don't think we think deeply enough about, or if we do, it's kind of like in a one-track way. Things must be preserved, or emulation is great, or so I really appreciate that kind of integrated approach that you have there.
Sure, no problem. Thanks for having me.
All right, thanks a lot.
Great.